This is Tabby, and you're listening to what was supposed to be our holiday episode for 2021. A little context, we recorded this back in November. December was a very busy month at work, and then unfortunately I got hit with coronavirus and had to quarantine without access to the editing software. So that's why this episode is a little late. I have Carrie and Amy back with me, the hosts of the Perks of Being a Book Lover podcast. You may remember them from our episode on the Age of Innocence. You can find them on Facebook under Perks of Being a Book Lover, on Instagram at Perks of Being a Book Lover Pod, and on their website, perksofbeingaboooklover.com. Without further delay, here is our episode on The Princess Bride. Hello folks, this is the Modern Life podcast. I'm back today with the Perks of Being a Book Lover pod with Carrie and Amy. Hello, you two.
Hi, Tabby. It's been so long since we've talked to you in person.
I'm excited to have you.
Hey, Tabby.
Hi, Carrie. Carrie's feeling a little congested today.
That's really sums up our personalities. I'm like, hi, Tabby, it's been so long. And Carrie's like, hey, Tabby.
Before we dive into our main topic, which is The Princess Bride, thank you two so much for suggesting this one. We'll just go into our modern thoughts. Amy, what have you got for us today?
I have been stressing about this modern thought, but mainly it's because I've been stressing about the holidays coming up well, I guess this is going to air, closer to Christmas. But one of the things, there's so many horrible things about the COVID era, but one of the nice things that I found last holiday season is that it was very chill. Like the holiday season was very chill
true.
Because, we were in much smaller groups. You just did enough to get by, or at least at my house we did. And it made it very nice, especially for me, who I'm the one who does all the planning for, Thanksgiving and the holidays. And I'm not feeling chill. I'm not feeling chill at all. I just got a call. My mother and father are coming, my mother and father-in-law, my brother-in-law, my kids, their significant others, and then my sister and her husband are coming. And then she texted me yesterday and asked if her brother-in-law and sister-in-law could come. And am I going to say no? I'm not going to turn anybody away on Thanksgiving, but it's starting to be a very full house, and I am not chill about it. So that's one thing I that's my modern thought of the day.
I think a lot of people are going to be able to relate to this one. And how do you navigate all the different family meetups and opinions and,
We got to avoid it last year, which was kind of nice.
I didn't miss Thanksgiving or Christmas or Easter. I was like, this is good. And it's not that I don't like being around my family, but I was okay with that. But then again, I could almost, dig a hole and stick my body in it and be perfectly fine for the rest of my life. So
you make yourself sound so fun.
I am nothing but fun.
Gary, what's your modern thought?
It relates to COVID, but not directly. So I do have a cold. It is just a cold. My daughter had it 2 weeks ago, and then my husband got it, and now I have it. So my modern thought, it relates to quarantining last year. We, at least, my kids didn't go to school in person. My husband works from home. We weren't seeing family. We weren't seeing people. And so we didn't get sick at all.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't get sick. And so now, the only sickness I felt was from, just like a side effect of getting my COVID vaccines. And that, I knew it was the COVID vaccine, right? So my modern thought is, as we start to sort of go back or ramp back up to real life or whatever it is, it's like, oh my gosh, you get sick now and you're constantly thinking, well, is it COVID? Should I get myself tested for COVID? Even though my daughter, she tested for COVID the day before she stayed home. She was starting to feel gross, so she didn't have COVID. I know it's not COVID, but I'm like, I should probably get tested for COVID just in case it's COVID, even though I know it's not COVID. And I'm laying around like, oh my gosh, I don't feel good. I just don't know how to react not feeling well.
Mm-hmm.
You don't know how to take a cold anymore.
I guess, or I'm like, this is, I don't know. But at the same time, I noticed, so I was supposed to have people, we're looking into having our kids' bathroom remodel a little bit. And I was supposed to have people come yesterday and this morning. And so I contacted them and I was like, I've got a little cold, I can wear a mask, but if you want to reschedule. And they were all like, yep, let's reschedule, which I feel like in the before times, people would have probably been like, oh, it's just a cold. But I'm wondering if people are taking like upper respiratory things a little bit more seriously, just on the off chance that, like, well, maybe it could be COVID, or why do I want to take a chance on getting sick anyway? So maybe that's maybe that'll be like a good result, that people, when they do feel sick, they're going to be like, I'm staying home. I'm not going into work. I'm not doing these extra things.
Hopefully, yeah.
I think for both of us, it's about the transition back to normal life.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so my modern thought is I've been trying to find some good news, and last month, that would have been October 2021, is the first time the United States has issued its first gender-neutral passport to somebody.
Cool.
And I just thought that was pretty amazing. So in the sex box on the form, it'll just say an X, and it was issued to Dana Zim, who is a 66-year-old intersex activist. And the thing is, they had to sue the State Department to get this for themselves. The burden is on them to like do all this advocacy for themselves, which I don't think is great, but at least they finally did get this passport, and I feel like it's only going to go forward from here. The thing to note is that they are intersex, so this is different from a gender identity because it describes your body and how it looks, and there's so many different types of ways people can be born intersex, whereas with male and female, we just think of, well, you have this set of genitals and you have this set of genitals, and I feel like those people who couch their bigotry in like, oh, I just want to say the accurate thing, like I don't want to call things what they aren't, and all those people who are so stuck in their binary should have been the ones like advocating for this all along. If you are saying like you're just interested in the real science and the real biology, it's it's just one of those things that's like, no you're not. So I'm just happy that we got this good news, and hopefully there'll be more passports like that to come.
I did see that in the headlines. I didn't look into it deeply, but I do remember that. That's awesome.
I mean, I'm certainly not a scientist, but I do try to read a lot of science-y things. And I'm like, the people who are like, nature isn't like that. I'm like, you have not read like anything about nature in your whole entire life. If you think that like nature is like female and that's what this is, and male and this over here on this side, I'm like, nature does some pretty wild stuff all the time that is like all over the board. So I'm just like,
agreed.
What?
Yeah.
I don't know.
But yeah, I think this finishes our modern thoughts, and we can dive into the main topic, which is The Princess Bride. We're going to be talking about the book and the movie, which came out in 1987. This is from Wikipedia, just a quick summary. Princess Bride is a fairy tale adventure about a beautiful young woman and her one true love. He must find her after a long separation and save her. They must battle the evils of the mythical kingdom of Florin to be reunited with each other. I don't think that we need to go into a whole long synopsis, because I think especially American listeners have probably been embedded with this movie in their soul since they were little.
At least if you're of a certain age. I don't know about
that's a good point.
My daughter has never seen it, and I said, you have to see The Princess Bride, but she's like, she doesn't care about it. Maybe one day she will, but probably my suggesting it is why she won't watch it, because that's the way teenagers are. But Yeah, so I think people of a certain age definitely have seen it, but maybe not the younger generation.
That is a good point. Yeah, I was also going to ask you too, because I finally read the book for this podcast. For some reason, there isn't an audiobook of this one, so it was a little bit harder for me to finally get a hold of it and make time to read it. But the author sets up this whole mythology around the book, and even in later editions, like never really lets go of. Like he says, like he was told this story, and the story is actually written by S. Morgenstern, and you know these countries are real. And even when he goes into talking about how the movie was filmed, he's saying like Andre the Giant took him to the Florin Museum, and like all this, it just like never stops. The way he's kind of holding on to this weird story around the story.
Yeah.
And I was wondering how you two felt about that.
I hated it.
Me too. Okay.
So this is the first time that I've read the book. I've probably seen the movie 5 or 6 times. I had no idea that there was that whole meta setup in the book. And when I first started reading it, I was really confused by it. And I was reading the 30th anniversary edition. So there was the initial sort of setup that he does. But then there's also, he included his 20th anniversary introduction and his 30th anniversary introduction. And both of them are also commenting on this whole meta situation that he's set up about Morgenstern writing this book and everything. I really just wanted to skip over all of that and start with the story. And I know we haven't started talking about the movie so much yet, but I'm so glad that in the movie, they just sort of cut most of that out and made it the grandfather reading to the grandson, which I thought was much more touching anyway.
100% agree. Carrie, how did you feel about that?
Yeah, I didn't even read the intro. I started to read the introductions and I was like, okay, I'm not. I just quit. Usually I am not a DNFer, but I totally DNF'd all that 30th introduction, 25th introduction. I was like, where does this book actually start? And that's where I started. I had a low tolerance for all that.
The nonsense.
Yeah, I was like, can we get to the point? Now, I will say some of that was because maybe under different circumstances, but I had like a crap ton of stuff I needed to read for November. And so maybe, you know, if I'd had more time, but even then, I think I would have just skimmed it at the very most.
Yeah, I started skimming it too, because he goes into like how sad it was to get a divorce and stuff, and I'm like, okay, like, and then Amy messaged me too. It's like, did you read that extra chapter about Buttercup's baby? And I'm like, no, I didn't. And she's like, okay, good.
I don't know why he set it up like that, really. I don't know. Maybe he thought like that gave it more meat, because the story itself is basically just a wonderful fairy tale. And maybe he thought like adding that stuff in the beginning like made it like a little bit more cerebral, although I don't really think so. But do you know what I mean? Like, I don't really know why it needed that, or why he felt the need to. That seemed to make it more about him, honestly, the writer.
Yeah, I can see that.
As opposed to the story.
I also found an article that documented all these people who grew up reading this book who thought all of that was real. Because when you're reading that stuff as a child, you don't really question it. And it's not until like later when you're in your 20s and you're like, wait a minute, Florin's not a real country. Like, what was that all about?
When they never talk about it in social studies class, like, where's Florin? Where is that?
That was definitely weird. And I tried to get through it because I thought, well, this, he wrote it. It's part of the book. I should read it. But I couldn't quite tell if it was actually an introduction, like he was being, like it was reality, like he was writing an introduction. But then he would throw this like imaginary stuff in there about the real country of Florin and, Stephen King wanting to. Stephen King is thrown in there. Maybe that's at the end. I can't remember. He throws some stuff in about Stephen King writing an adaptation of Buttercup's Baby, and I mean, it's like it's kind of crazy. So if you read the book, I think you can just skip that part, unless you're a diehard and really want to read it.
I kind of want to start off with asking you guys if you like the movie better or the book after reading it?
Movie.
But
Yeah.
here is the thing. I felt like the movie really followed the book very, very closely, except for, a few things. The thing is, I don't know that I've ever done it this way before, but like I said, I've seen this movie 5 or 6 times before I read the book. So it was already sort of iconic in my mind. So then to go back and read the book, it was very similar. It was almost exactly like the movie, but it just wasn't visual.
Did you visualize the movie the whole time?
Yeah. So I wonder if had I read the book first and then watched the movie, and if I hadn't seen the movie so many times prior to reading the book, I might have felt differently. But because I had done it in the reverse order, to me, you just can't get much better than the movie version of it. I did enjoy the backstories of Inigo Montoya and Fezzik.
Mm-hmm.
I enjoyed that. To me, it was worth it to read that part. What about you, Carrie? I know you like the movie better, but
Yeah. I think the same thing. I mean, I don't know that I can think of any movies that I've watched the movie before reading the book. Now, there have been movies that I have seen and then I realize that they're, like, for example, it was Russell Crowe. There was a movie called A Beautiful Mind that was based on a book. And I really liked that movie. And then I went back and read the biography that it was based on. But I didn't have strong feelings like, oh, the movie's better or, oh, the book's better. But I only saw that movie once. It wasn't like I don't know how much nostalgia plays a role in this as well. So I don't know. But definitely I prefer the movie.
Yeah, same here. And that's actually not me even kind of trying to be mean towards the book. It's actually me more realizing that he's also a really brilliant screenwriter. And it doesn't often happen that you have the person who wrote the book also wrote the screenplay. And Amy actually made me read Cary Elwes' memoir, As You Wish, about how this was all put together and just his doggedness and trying to get this made. And like he had sold the script multiple times, but that doesn't mean somebody's going to make a movie out of it. So he like bought the rights back and just this very long battle for him to get this even filmed. I don't know. I kind of find that admirable in a way.
Yeah. And I think he was smart because the changes that they did make in the movie, I just don't think those things would have conveyed as well in movie form. Like that whole meta thing where he's talking about, the things that the father cut when he was reading, that the father was pretty much illiterate and he just cut whole sections of the book out that were really boring. That wouldn't have translated into movie form. So the way they did it with the grandfather was, I think it cut out the extraneous.
The grandfather's setup is somebody telling a story as a framing device for a movie is my least favorite thing, like ever. Like, I don't know why. It just drives me bonkers. It's like Water for Elephants, where it's like some elderly person is suddenly telling a stranger their whole life story and it like never makes any sense. But the way this movie does it is like so brilliant, and I don't think it's ever going to be like replicated again because it sacrifices tension for comedy. And I don't know if every writer would have been confident enough to do that. Like when she's getting eaten by the eels and suddenly we cut back to the grandfather being like, hey, relax. Like it's just,
Right.
There's so many funny moments like that they're just genius.
Ultimately, I think The Princess Bride, it's a touching story, right? On a lot of different levels. So you have Wesley and Buttercup and the touching nature of that, but then you have the touching nature of Inigo Montoya and his father, and then you have the friendship between Inigo and Fezzik. I think in a lot of ways, the story is very touching. And so to do something other than what they did with the grandfather and the grandson, like that just that's like the bow on the top.
Yeah. Also that they just spoil the story. Like when the grandfather's like, no one gets Humperdinck, he lives. You're like, you're just telling me that? Like in the middle of the story? I love it. It's so great.
There was another theme that I saw that I didn't realize when I watched it, but especially in the book. Well, they do it. The grandfather does it. Is the whole thing of like life isn't fair. So, when the grandfather says, I'm sorry, but, Wesley dies. And the kid's like, what? He can't die? That's not fair. And the grandfather's saying, but life isn't fair. But then what actually happens in the movie is, Wesley sort of comes back to life, with the help of Magic Max, So it's sort of, I don't know, it's an interesting...
He was just mostly dead.
Just mostly dead, not all the way dead. That's right. Can I, this is completely, is not intellectual at all, but the mother's haircut in the very opening scene, I don't know if anybody noticed that. Did anybody notice that? The mother in the very opening scene when she comes in to like kiss her son goodnight, she had the worst haircut I have ever seen. It was like...
It's like a ponytail mullet.
It was a ponytail mullet. Did you notice that too?
No. I didn't see it. No.
Oh, well, you need to go back and watch that one more time.
I mean, it was so bad I made a note. I made a note of it on my list of things to talk about. Mother's haircut. Ugh, I have in parentheses. Okay, sorry. We can go back to the more important stuff now.
I had a question. This is a family movie, but I remember when I first watched it, the torture scene was pretty terrifying to me and kind of scary. And also the fact that they let Inigo have his revenge, you don't really see that in kids' movies. It's normally the conclusion is, oh, we forgive each other, or we, but when he's like... killing the villain and he's like, I want my father back, you son of a bitch. I cry like every time and it's like such a great moment, but I don't know if children's movies or like family movies would really go this route nowadays.
That's a good thought. I don't know. I guess I don't particularly think of it as a children's movie. I would go with family movie, like something that you would watch as a family.
Well, that's another thing that was like so hard to promote this film because it's every genre.
Right.
It's like action, comedy, romance, fantasy, There's very few movies where you could say like, oh, it falls into every genre ever.
Yeah. I mean, when he talks about, Cary Elwes talks about that in his book, As You Wish, about how hard it was. And actually, it was not very popular in the theaters when it came out. Mm-hmm. It's kind of... gotten this iconic cult status now, over 30 some years. But at the time, it really, they had a hard time marketing it to audiences.
Yeah. I asked a manager at work who's older if he remembered this movie coming out. And he was like, yeah, I wouldn't have seen that because it's like, there's the word princess in there. And I don't want to be like bullied at school for, there's all this like gender stuff going on too. It's like, is this a girl movie? And
yeah. I mean, it definitely kind of is a girl movie in some ways, but there's a lot of action and adventure and swashbuckling,
right.
sword fighting and torture and things that sound,
and revenge.
And revenge that guys might like. Does that sound horrible to say that guys like torture and revenge? I don't know. But anyway, what I'm saying is that's not normally something you would see in like a kid movie or a girl movie. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But I wonder, because we've shown some movies that we watched when we were younger and we've shown them to our kids and we've sort of been, because in our heads we're like, oh, this movie is okay. We watched it when we were kids and then we show it to our kids and it was like, oh crap, they say that, or they do that. I forgot they do that. And we've had that happen several times.
Yeah. I watched 16 Candles in my late 20s and I was like, what the
yeah.
This is so offensive.
Yeah, I can't even remember now what the movies were, but I was like, oh, because we were like, well, this is fine for the kids, especially now. Like, I don't think it would faze people because kids see so much on social media and video games and stuff like that. True. Like, I don't know the whole idea of revenge and torture. I don't think it would faze people.
And it's not gory. I mean, yes.
Yeah.
The torture wasn't gory, blood and things, and neither was the, although I guess Inigo, his wounds were quite bloody, but when he killed the counts, they weren't particularly. So maybe
Yeah,
that's
that was one of the things that for me was too close to the book, that I thought was strange that they didn't change it, because in the book at the end it's not even clear if Inigo is gonna live. There's like descriptions of him holding in his like intestines and stuff, like he's very badly wounded. So I found it strange that obviously in the movie they make the decision like he's fine, he's gonna be the Dread Pirate Roberts, yet they still have him also sustain all those injuries.
Yeah.
And I just thought that was a strange choice. It's like, and this dude would probably not be okay.
right. Or they needed to maybe make, I did notice that it seemed like his injuries were awfully bad for him to be able to like come back and do all the, the sword fighting that he did at the end in order to be able to exact his revenge. But maybe they needed to make his injuries a little less on screen to make it a little bit more believable. But, I still love the movie, so it doesn't matter.
But I wonder if that's sort of part of the
mystique of it, like
Well, or, you hear about, I don't know, you hear stories about, I don't know, parents whose kids are stuck under a car and they have, just because of the adrenaline and stuff, they're able to lift a car and stuff. And I mean, I don't know if that's actually true, but it seems like, just the adrenaline that people are sometimes able to, I just know from having panic attacks, right? Like just what your body can do when it's stressed can be kind of miraculous. And so I don't know, like to me, the fact that he is that wounded just makes him getting his revenge. Like he has spent 20 years living, putting every single bit of his energy and effort and thought into seeking revenge. And so like for me, it sort of lends itself more, the fact that he is so injured and yet he keeps going. I don't know. Like, I sort of like that because it just makes that revenge
all the sweeter.
Yeah. So.
Okay, you guys convinced me. I was also wondering how you two felt about the setup of the romance, because I was asking some friends and there was no consensus. Some people liked it, some people didn't. Wesley and Buttercup falling in love. It happens in about 30 seconds in this 3-scene like setup. And I absolutely love it. It's quick, it's snappy, it tells you a lot about these people, what their lives are like, how they fell in love, blah, blah, blah. Like, to me, it's great script writing in a way that's like, this is kind of the focus on the story, but let's keep it moving. But then I also know people are like, well, it doesn't really tell you why exactly these people are attracted to one another or like what their thing is. So I was wondering how you two felt about that.
I mean, they're both good looking, and when you're 17, do you really need much more than that?
That's the book.
And then they're both on the, they're out in rural Florin somewhere, and I mean, how many other males and females do they see? Not that many. And if you're, like you said, somewhere between 17 and 21, say, that doesn't take much more than that. You're good looking, and there's nobody else to choose from. So there you go.
Yeah, I just thought it was this cute setup. It brings in the "as you wish" line.
Yes.
That's now like everyone's quoting it.
And I had forgotten, after rewatching this the other night, I had forgotten how dreamy Cary Elwes was at that time. I really thought he was. I mean, I've seen him in other things since, and he's matured.
He's still dreamy.
He's still a good-looking guy. But I think he was maybe like 22 or 23 when they filmed this. He was surely good looking.
One of the things though that seemed a little bit different to me in the movie. So like in the book, Buttercup, it seems like it takes her a long time to realize how she feels about him. And in the movie, that's like super quick, that he looks at her and she's like, oh. And in the book, I don't know. It's not until like he's getting ready to leave that she's like, oh, this is how I feel about you. And so I felt like that was a little bit, it was more condensed in the movie, which I thought was fine. The other thing I noticed is that in the book, Buttercup is kind of like a ding-dong.
Yeah.
You know, like she's not super bright. And I don't feel like in the movie that's quite as...
Which I appreciate, because that did annoy me about the book, that they make her seem like she's really like, you know, the stereotypical dumb blonde, you know?
Yeah.
And I didn't really like that. There were some things about the book that I thought didn't age particularly well. And that being one. And then there was although this was more about the meta part, but him talking about his son being like really overweight. And do you know what I'm talking about? There were some sections.
Was that one of the sections I skimmed?
Perhaps, but he talks about his son just being really overweight and how, you know, that was so awful. Anyway, there were some parts of the book that I thought didn't age particularly well. But Buttercup being a ding dong is one of them. And in the movie, she's not really. She might be extremely naive, but I don't think that she's necessarily dumb.
That's interesting you guys bring that up, because I had something in my notes about that and then I took it out. But it was, there was this moment when Buttercup at the very end kind of comes into her power. So she has been going to all these like queen classes or whatever. Like she's doing the diplomacy, she's doing the etiquette. Like part of her journey is her kind of getting a little bit more intelligent and queenly. And at the end, when they ride away, she climbs on top of the horse and then says, "I am the queen, go check on Prince Humperdinck." And that's how they get away, because everybody just believes her. And, you know, she commands them so well that they just run into the castle. But part of what was so strange to me is that she like steps on top of the horse, like gets out of her saddle and like stands on the horse. And for some reason, the imagery of that like totally ruined that scene for me, which is like, why would anybody do that? And also that's not a cool thing to do unless you're like a circus performer. Anyways, Buttercup is not as fully realized as a character in the book as, for example, Inigo and Fezzik, who get all these wonderful like backstories and stuff. I do agree with that.
Yeah. At one point, Wesley says, "Don't you understand anything that's going on?" Buttercup shook her head. Wesley shook his too. "You never have been the brightest, I guess."
Yeah.
And I'm like, what?
True love.
Wesley wouldn't say that, because that's kind of a jerky thing to say.
That kind of leads me into my next scene, which I always had an issue with until you guys made me read this memoir, and that is the fire swamp scene. Because in the movie, Buttercup has been very, she's been making a lot of decisions, and she hasn't really been like a damsel in distress. Like she jumps in the water. She's like, sure, there's eels. I'm going to like try to swim away. She has all these great comebacks to her kidnappers. She's with the dread Pirate Roberts and just tosses him down a hill. Like she's pretty, forward in the things she's willing to do. And in the fire swamp, suddenly she turns into this like, just doesn't do anything, is constantly crying for Wesley, you know. She like is barely able to punch this like one little rat in the nose with this weird prop. And then Cary Elwes was saying in the memoir, like the set was really awesome, but the costumes that they put, you know, these dwarves in for the rats, it looked kind of cheesy, even though like they're doing their best acting job. And he was like, is it too campy and unrealistic? And that's finally what made me go, oh, like Buttercup is only incompetent because I think this is supposed to look way more scary and way more like, if this was filmed today, there'd be like massive CGI and the rats would be like, you know. So finally I was like, okay, I can make my peace with the fire swamp.
Well, and I'm trying to remember in that thing. I mean, I think that there was an accident on the set, wasn't there? There was some point where either Carrie got injured or Robin Wright got injured. Do you remember what I'm talking about?
I don't think in the fire swamp. No, I think she was a little scared about having her dress set on fire.
Yeah.
And I know they were also apprehensive about Cary Elwes announcing that he's going to go head first into that little prop thing they made for the quicksand, because it wasn't designed for that, but it just looked lame to have him go in feet first. But everything ended up fine there.
Yeah, because they talked about actually the The author, William Goldman, who was the screenwriter too, even though he knew that her dress was going to come on fire, he screamed.
Oh, yeah.
He screamed on set, "She's on fire! She's on fire!" because he'd forgotten, and they had to like redo the whole scene because of that. Which I thought was
seemed
funny.
to be like a bit of a rattle. Like there's another story where they can't find out where all this weird audio is coming from, and turns out he's like praying out loud behind one of the sets, and the mic has been picking it up the whole time. Like he's like so nervous about this movie getting made. It's like maybe he just needs to not be there.
Yeah.
That sand part was different in the book than it was in the movie. In the book, it's almost like they had strategized how, and I mean, you couldn't show this in the movie, but in the book, they had strategized, like, if she falls in, how she's going to hold her body so that he can jump in after her. And so I was like, oh, well, that's interesting. I didn't think about that. So then when I was watching the movie, I was like, oh, she just falls in. Like, they hadn't talked about, well, how will we handle it if we fall into the sand pit? And then she falls in, and in my head, I'm thinking, did they have this conversation off screen? And, like, how would he be able to find her? So I thought that was kind of interesting, just because it had gone into more detail in the story. But in the movie, it's just she falls in, he jumps in, he finds her, and they're up. But it probably wouldn't have been too interesting to listen to them strategize how she's going to hold her body, like a starfish or whatever.
Well, it was scarier in the book because I think, like, as he's trying to reach for her and he can't see her, he grabs something thinking it's her, and it's like it's a skeleton. Like, I mean, so if maybe because this was done before CGI or any that kind of thing, that maybe just would have been too hard to try to figure out how to film. But that would have been kind of scary. It would have been a nice ad if they could have done it.
Amy, you were talking about some of the injuries that were sustained. So Cary Elwes was hit by a sword in that scene where he does pass out from Count Rugen hitting him with the sword. That is real. That is the take they used. Okay. He's actually passed out, which I thought was so funny. And then he also broke his toe. And they're like in this tiny like village out in the countryside, and they keep going to the same doctor. And it was just so funny to me to imagine like you're just this like country doctor doing your job, and this guy in like a Zorro outfit keeps coming in for like treatment. It's like, what's happening? But when he said in the memoir that he broke his toe, I immediately knew what scene it was. That scene where he sits down on the rock always looked so strange to me. And now I'm like, oh, he's sitting down because he broke his toe.
Where he has his legs sort of very straight. Okay, yes. I was trying to picture where it was, but I thought, I can't remember what scene. But then I thought it might be that one because it was awkward the way he gets up and sits down. Yeah. One of the things that I thought was interesting that, unless you have listened to this memoir by Cary Elwes, but all the training that they did to do the sword fighting scenes.
Oh my gosh.
So, the actors who played Wesley and Inigo, they did all of that sword play themselves, and they trained for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks to do it. And
even after his broken toe. Yeah.
Even after his broken toe. So as I was watching it this time, I really appreciated how well they did doing it, considering how they didn't have stunt doubles who were professional sword fencers or, what have you doing it. So...
There was also this like rivalry between like Cary Elwes and Mandy Patinkin that I thought was really cute, where it's like, well, we can do this with stunts and this with stunts, and they kind of would look at each other and be like, no, we can do it, and then kind of encourage one another to become better at it. And I mean, Mandy Patinkin also has a whole other fight scene with Count Rugen that he had to train for as well within, like, as you said, weeks. It's pretty incredible that they were able to pull it off.
One thing that I noticed is in the book, did you notice how they described Prince Humperdinck compared to them casting Chris Sarandon?
Yes.
Yeah.
I thought that was really interesting because when you say Prince Humperdinck, I think Chris Sarandon, but in the book, he's like huge. Like, he's got a barrel chest and his thighs are like barrels. He's not tall, but he weighed close to 250 pounds. He walked like a crab, side to side. And so I thought that was kind of Yeah, I just thought that was really interesting that they didn't find somebody who was like bulkier. And so I don't know.
Yeah, because all the other characters are so on the mark.
Mm-hmm.
Like Robin Wright is extremely beautiful. You know, Andre the Giant is Fezzik. I wrote that down too, that even in the script, and I don't think this is the script they started with, but it's the only one I could find online. It says Prince Humperdinck, a man of incredible power and bearing, standing on his royal robes on a castle balcony. So even when he was writing the script, they were still thinking of him as this, like, as you said, like big, muscular person.
I wonder if they wanted someone who was maybe who wasn't that much bigger than Cary Elwes, who played Wesley.
That makes sense.
You know what I mean? Like if you had a huge powering presence, maybe it wouldn't make sense that Humperdinck would give up so easily in that bedroom scene. I don't know. That's just a thought, but I noticed that too, that their casting with that was not as close to the book representation. I thought Chris Sarandon did a fine job.
Oh yeah.
But
the other thing is that it didn't talk about, like, in the book it talks about how he killed, like that was his sport, you know, like he had a special zoo and he would kill things, and he was just constantly killing things, and like that,
it made him more sadistic sounding. Yeah.
Right. And in the movie he's more like, I don't know, like a gentlemanly king or something like that. I don't know. Like, in some ways, I think if they had made him, like, if they had cast him as he was written, I don't know. Like, I guess it could go two ways. Either it wouldn't have been believable when he just gives up, or it would have been even more, it would have been really ironic, you know, that he gives up. So I don't know.
The only quote that I wrote down from the book is actually about Prince Humperdinck, because this is right before he's like willing to kill his future wife, and it's so funny to me. And this is also like a great example of how much humor is in the book, and it translates so well into the movie. But it says, the prince was 75 minutes away from his first female murder, and he wondered if he could get his fingers to her throat before even the start of a scream. He had been practicing on giant sausages all the afternoon and had the movements down pretty pat. But then giant sausages weren't next, and all the wishing in the world wouldn't make them so.
That is a funny line.
I just want that.
Yeah. I was just saying, I think the casting overall was pretty spot on.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
Except for maybe that one. But even then, like, because I hadn't read the book, I didn't think, oh my gosh, that is the wrong person for Prince Humperdinck.
Oh,
you know, it's only after having read the book that it doesn't fit exactly.
Yeah.
Prince Humperdinck is actually my favorite character.
Really?
I think Chris Sarandon, he's my favorite. Like all his, like you said, all his like fake elegance and all the little nicknames he calls Buttercup, like my dulcet darling. Like he just makes me laugh. What are your guys' favorite characters? Now I need to know.
I asked Carrie this question the other day, and she's like, I don't know. Mine is probably Magic Max. I love Billy Crystal in that.
Oh my gosh.
And he improvised, a lot of that, of his role, his lines there, which was amazing. But other than that, I really like, I like Inigo Montoya too, a lot.
I think, because at first, Amy said, and I'm like, I don't think I have a favorite. But then after watching the movie, I thought, I really like Valerie, who doesn't get, she doesn't get very much in the book or the movie. But I just think the way, is it Carol Kane? Is that who plays her?
I think so, yeah.
The way she plays her, she's a liar! Liar! I just think she's so funny in that. And then the priest, the Maui, they're not huge characters, but I think that they are part of what makes the movie so funny, because you have these oddball characters that, I don't know, that really add to it.
Yeah. They make it unique. Yeah. I mean, it's like in a book when you have like, sometimes it's those little details, and for him to think up to think up a priest that would talk with a lisp like that is just kind of
Right.
funny. I don't know.
Right.
Yeah.
So, Carrie, you actually brought up the zoo from the book, which is like the different levels that Prince Humperdinck has to just like practice his killing on all these different kinds of animals. And one of the scenes they changed was the Guide My Sword scene for the movie. So instead of having Inigo and Fezzik fight through all these levels of the zoo and try to get to Wesley at the lower level, you have this scene of them knocking out the albino, and then they find the secret switch to get into the dungeon. And to me, that's one of the strongest examples of what a great screenwriter he is, that he's willing to like let all this stuff go for the movie. It's like, well, we don't have the budget to have like 20 million animals and fight scenes, and we already have enough fight scenes in there, so what, it probably wouldn't fit. And that scene is sweet again because it reminds us of the relationship between Inigo and his father, and it's also like funny at the end, and it accomplishes so much in such little time.
Yeah.
Well, and I think too, it also plays into that idea of like sort of happy accidents, and I feel like there were a lot of things, especially when Wesley and Inigo and Fezzik are trying to get into the castle, like a lot of the things that happen are just, they're sort of accidental. Like they just go into it and they're like, we don't know how this is going to play out. And things just kind of work out. And so I feel like that is an example of, he just accidentally leans on the tree and there you go. It opens for him. So I think that, I don't know, it's sort of one of those, they sort of all work together. And I think if it had been more like this big ordeal to go through the layers or the levels of the zoo and fight all these animals, then you wouldn't have that sort of consistency of accidental.
The whimsical, yeah.
Right,
yeah.
right.
I agree with all that, but part of me misses a fight scene with a big, huge snake. I think that could have been cool.
Except the snake would have just been like a stuffed animal.
It would have.
And,
You're right.
They didn't have...
You're right. But a girl can dream, right? It would have been cool if they could have made it work. I'm wondering what y'all thought about how they sort of changed the time period. Because in the book, it made it seem like it was set like 1800s, or at least that's the impression I got.
Oh, you're right. Yeah.
And in the movie, they made it completely like a fairy tale. Like, Middle Ages or whatever we think of as being like fairy tale time, which I think was a good move. I think it makes much more sense to have it that way.
Yeah, I do too.
And it also lets you get away with, these are just like peasant clothes instead of like, now we have to find like all these Victorian dresses and all, it kind of gives you more leeway in getting away budget-wise with like costuming choices.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, Buttercup's dresses, they're so pretty. Like every Halloween, somebody's dressed up as Buttercup, right? Like these dresses are iconic now.
Yeah. There were things that after I read the book that I hadn't noticed in the movie that then I noticed. Like the thing about Fezzik loving rhymes.
Yeah.
I never noticed that in the movie until I read that part in the book. And then when they're on the boat, I noticed that Fezzik and Inigo were rhyming back and forth and how much Fezzik liked that. I never noticed that in the movie before, but I did because I had read the book this time. Did y'all notice that? Or were there things that you noticed in the movie that you didn't, just little things, but then when you read the book?
Yeah, to me, it was Inigo saying when he's drunk and the Brute Squad is like trying to get him to be locked up and he's like, no, I'm going back to the beginning. Like, I don't think I ever really realized I knew what he was talking about or anything. And it's like, oh, well, he's just there because that's where he got the job with Vizzini. And they, their thing was, if you get separated, go back to the starting point, and that's when we'll all meet up. And that's why he's not willing to leave there. But I don't think I ever questioned or even thought about like, why is he there? And like,
yeah, same,
made more sense.
Yeah. Although I wonder, because I sort of liked it, the whole rhyming thing with Fezzik. I felt like that was, I don't know, maybe one of the sweeter aspects of the story that maybe could have been given like just a little, like a little more focus other than that one time. Like if it had happened maybe again. And so then you would see that like this was a pattern to how they interacted with each other. But it only happens that one time when they're on the boat.
I think there's a few more times later on.
Are there?
But I think you're right that they don't really there's not a big like lens on it or anything.
Yeah, they don't like, I don't know. I just felt like maybe a little more emphasis.
I agree. That would have been better. Although you said that they did, Tabby, and it's very possible. There was a lot of it, especially between Inigo and Fezzik, that I found unintelligible, mainly on Fezzik's part.
Yeah.
Like he's talking, but I can't always understand what he's saying. And apparently when they were filming, like his French is so thick and he doesn't really speak much English at all that they had a hard time, I think. Like he had to sort of memorize the lines and how to say it because he doesn't really speak English.
Yeah. When he picks up Inigo and he's drunk, the first thing he says to him rhymes with what Inigo just said. So that's how you know that, this is Fezzik. But I agree that it's hard to hear him sometimes. I had another little thing from the script that also relates to Fezzik. And that's the line where he says, "I just want you to feel you're doing well. I hate for people to die embarrassed." And that's when he's fighting with Wesley. And to me, that's like a very perfect moment of just encapsulating in one line. He's a gentle giant. Like, he's not really that bad of a guy. And also with Inigo, where he's so honorable. And even though he's beat, he immediately drops to the ground. He's like, okay, I lost, kill me, make it quick. These are these small little moments that make me believe later on why Wesley would work with them, why they would, become friends, and it just kind of shows the true nature of these two characters really well.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. What does Wesley say? I would just as soon, what is it? I can't remember. I would just as soon destroy
a stained glass window, than kill an artist like you.
Right. Yeah.
I love that moment.
Tabby, how many times have you seen this movie?
Quite a few. But I did not grow up with this. My first contact with this movie was in like summer camp when I was in the U.S. and I didn't speak any English. And this was a big event. Like one night, the kids could watch a movie and they watched The Princess Bride. And I think I kind of pieced out because I was like, I didn't grow up with this. I don't know what this is. And it wasn't until like kind of later on that I started watching it when I could understand what was happening.
Mm-hmm. Because I was wondering, I assumed it probably wasn't the first time you had seen it, but I wasn't sure if you had seen it as many times as Carrie and I have seen it.
Yeah, I've seen it a bunch, yeah.
So that's funny that you said, well, I see now why you said it's supposed to be a Christmas movie, because in the beginning, with the scenes with the grandpa and the
It's
grandson.
Technically a Christmas movie, yeah.
There's like a stuffed Santa in the background or something. But but when you initially said that to me, I was a little perplexed because I didn't remember it that way or think of it that way.
Yeah, nobody does, which makes sense. There's also a scene with the kid and the grandpa. There was a really great action line from the script, and it's when the kid says, "You mean he wins? Jesus, Grandpa, what did you read me this thing for?" And then the next line is, "And he desperately fights for control," which is so funny to me because we've all been there where we're reading a book and like the author takes like a left turn and it is that feeling of fighting for control, but you didn't write the book. There's nothing you could do about it. It's like you're just there for the ride.
I thought Wallace Shawn was perfect as Vizzini. I can't imagine anybody else being him. And again, he's the only person I can picture because of seeing the movie first so many times before reading the book.
But he also doesn't really fit the description of the character from the book. He's older. I got the sense that the Vizzini in the book was definitely not bald. I mean, was what you would envision like a dark-haired Italian man is what I envisioned.
Right. Yeah,
right.
yeah.
anyway, he doesn't fit the description in the book, but you're right, Carrie. He's a great Vizzini.
Yeah, he's fun.
I think that even though physically he doesn't fit, like emotionally he fits, because I'm just looking through here and it says the Sicilian winced out loud, the Sicilian winced again. And that's what he does, so yeah. I think that even though maybe physically he doesn't match, his mannerisms match.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah, that's so true. My only other note in here is one of my favorite lines, which is Buttercup saying, Wesley and I are joined by the bonds of love, and you cannot track that, not with 1,000 bloodhounds, and you cannot break it, not with 1,000 swords. I love that line. Because it's so scary, too. Like, Prince Humperdinck in that scene is very scary. He's holding, like, a dagger. He's, like, forcefully gripping her and, like, escorting her to her room. And she's not having any of it. I just find her, like, bravery in that scene very, very cool. And I think Buttercup often gets ignored, because she's just like, she's the princess, she's the pretty girl, but she actually has a lot of stuff in the film that makes her, just as capable as any of the other characters.
I agree. She is a cool character. One of the things that I appreciate about the movie, and maybe is partly what made the movie so good too, is that apparently all the actors really got along really well and liked each other and enjoyed working with each other. And I wonder if that really helped the movie itself, just it feeling like it's just, like we said, like all the people that they got to play these characters were like perfect for the roles, but they actually really got along so well.
Yeah.
And you could definitely get the feel of that.
Yeah. Any last notes that you guys had? I kind of went through all my notes.
I got through all of mine. I even got to mention the ponytail mullet, so I'm happy.
Oh, man.
I did like seeing the grandson's room. I was watching it with my husband, and we were he was pointing out, oh, look, there's a poster from The Fridge, who was like a football star in the 80s. You probably don't know this, Tabby, but I remembered The Fridge from that football player from the 1980s. And I think his jersey, well, he's wearing a Chicago Bears football jersey. And my husband recognized the number of the player that he was wearing. Anyway, there was a lot of like fun stuff, like nostalgia wise on the walls of the little boy's room that reminded me of that time.
Just the video game he's playing too. It's like, yeah, that was hot stuff back in the day.
It absolutely was.
Seeing little Fred Savage and his hair sticking up, like he's been in bed, and that is how my husband and I watched it, and he was like, that's Miles. That's our youngest son. And his hair kind of resembles Fred Savage's, and that it's kind of sticking up in 12 different directions. I was like, yeah, that is
cute.
Yeah. Well, I definitely recommend it to anybody who hasn't seen it, especially that younger generation like my daughter. It's a great movie.
I don't think she's going to be listening to this, but nice try, Amy.
And if she did, and if she was, she'd still ignore you.
She would totally still ignore me.
But yeah, thank you two again so much for coming back on the podcast to talk about The Princess Bride. Can you tell people about your podcast, where people can find you, and what you do over there?
A bunch of nonsense is what we do over here.
We're an interview style show, and we talk to bookish people. Sometimes they're authors, sometimes they are book podcasters, book bloggers. We talk to booksellers. We find book lovers everywhere, and we chat them up. We talk to them about what they love about books, what they do with books, and then we have a segment where we ask them what they're reading, and then we find out a little bit about them.
Where can people find you on social media at Perks of Being a Book Lover?
We're on Instagram. We're Perks of Being a Book Lover Pod, and then you can find us on Facebook at The Perks of Being a Book Lover, and we have a new updated website that's kind of fun at perksofbeingabooklover.com. We have our episodes on there, but we also have some fun things like listener book recommendations. So we have what we call our 5-star read virtual bookshelf, and you can go on there. We probably have about 20 books on there of different listeners who have,
Oh, nice.
and have told us why that this book is a 5-star read for them. So, if you're looking for something new to read and, just are not sure what to read, go on there and check. And we also are featuring guests' pets. Because
yeah, I love that one.
because we have found, just like a recording today, that as we're all recording from home, you can often hear pets in the background. So we figured, why fight it? Just go with it and feature it. So now we've started featuring our guest pets. So you get to see cute little, pet photos. And who doesn't like a good pet photo?
Love that. Thank you two so much.
Thank you. It was fun.